Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Appreciate you joining me again for another week. Before I get into today's topic, as always, please make sure you're subscribed on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on: Apple, Spotify, Google. We're on all podcast platforms. By subscribing, you will help us get out to more people. While you're there, also jump on and leave us a 5-star review. You can follow along on Instagram, which is at The Unstoppable Dad, and on Facebook, The Unstoppable Dad Project. While you're on Facebook, if you would like, you can jump into our free group that we have there, where I'll be putting up some information outside of just the podcast stuff. Also, if you're interested in working with us and you're interested in joining the program, there is a link below in the show notes where you can jump on and you can book in a time for a free chat. This month, I am giving away 5 free consultations. So if you would like to be one of those 5, jump on and book in a time and let's have a chat. This week, we're going to go back to training. We're going to go back to overall health and well-being. Okay. And the thing that I wanted to cover off, because I get this come up a lot when I talk to people about their particular set of circumstances and joining a gym and training and things like that. And I wanted to go through some things that I would be focusing on if I couldn't get to a gym. Now, obviously, I'm in a very lucky, privileged position. You can see behind me, I'm in my garage. I have a home gym set up. I think for some people, that is a very, very powerful thing. I actually think for others, it's not ideal. And before I get into the weeds about the other stuff that I was going to talk about, I just want to touch on this because this actually came up this week when I was talking to somebody. So, for that person that I was talking to, and I've seen this come up a few times, the reason I think that having a home gym for some people isn't ideal is, firstly, I think some people need to actually go somewhere to do something. If you're somebody who works at home, if you're somebody who is trying to actually instill training habits, as in it's not something which is all an already set in part of your life, then actually getting up, allocating the time, going for a drive, and going to the gym can be something that is very much needed. And removing your, especially if you're going through maybe a rocky time at the moment where maybe there are things going on at home that you need to potentially remove yourself from. Or, as I said, if you work from home, I've dealt with some people who have gone ahead and set themselves up a home gym, but they work from home. So they're there all the time. So then when they get into training, it feels like work. And I experienced this when I had the gym, when I was working at the gym and then I was using that as my place to train. I didn't enjoy training. And for me and for a lot of people that I work with, while training is a necessity to try and build strength, reclaim athleticism, and raise your overall health and well-being, there also needs to be a level of enjoyment, otherwise you're not going to stick to it. And that enjoyment can be removed very quickly if you're not in the right environment for you. So if you're doing it at home and you've found that training at home has been a sticking point for you over and over and over again, one of the things that you may need to look at is actually going, paying for a gym membership, and it can be a cheap one, but where you're actually going somewhere else, because then it's your space and it's your time. And that's another topic I guess I'll bolt in as a bonus on this episode, because for me, I'm very lucky. I've got this gym set up at home. I've always had access to a gym, and being consistent with my training is not really something that I've ever struggled with. It's been something that I've always prioritized time for, sometimes at the detriment of other things in my life. But right now I'm on a pretty good balance where I actually train strength and conditioning sessions very regularly, 3 times a week. And then I also, but in saying that, I do actually remove myself from that and I go somewhere and I train like jujitsu 3 times a week as well. So I've kind of got that balance where the stuff I do at home, even though I can get interrupted by the kids, there's advantages. I actually see that as an advantage. I enjoy that side of it. And I think you can learn, you rather than see it as a hindrance, you can learn to enjoy that side of it a lot more. But it's very easy to think that setting up a home gym is going to be a solution for you, and it may not necessarily be it. Everyone is different. There are a lot of advantages to setting up a home gym. The biggest one of those is convenience. It cuts down on travel time, which for some people, especially let's say you're training 3 times a week, you've got 15 minutes of travel there, 15 minutes of travel back. Now, you may not have that, but let's say hypothetically, that's an extra half an hour every session. You can claim back an extra 90 minutes each week just in travel time if you have a home gym. So for some people, that's a major advantage. But there has to be this mentality and this mindset where if you have something set up at home, it's always set up and it is your space, and you have to have that ability to remove yourself from the other things that you potentially do at home, because it is important for you to enjoy the training, but it's also important for you to have that as your own time. So if you are somebody who is unable to go to a gym for some reason, right? Let's say you are very, very financially restricted. What should you focus on? There's 3 probably things I would focus on from an overall health and well-being standpoint. And the number one is sleep. I would be focusing on getting the best quality 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep a night, because sleep above everything else will help you basically attack the day in a healthy way. Now, as a dad, as a father, as somebody who has been through a sleep deprived state, I understand that there are going to be times in your life where you can't always prioritize sleep in the appropriate way. Now, I did do an episode quite a while ago now where I spoke about some tips that I think you need to look at for sleep to maximize the amount of sleep you can get in those times where sleep is not going to be optimal. I think setting yourself up for a proper bedtime, trying to have yourself in routine as much as possible. A lot of people talk about getting your kids into a routine for bedtime. I think that's just important for us as an adult, and not having fluctuating bedtimes. And sometimes we will need to. But again, this is like, it's almost like the old 80-20 rule that you'll hear some people talk about, where if I'm trying to do that 80% of the time, and then the other 20% of the time I'm not, then over the long term, I'm consistently hitting that goal, even though I'm not perfect all the time, because we're not going to be perfect on these things every single day, day in, day out. If you are, all power to you. But the reality is, for most people who have kids, who lead a busy life, who are career driven, you can't be perfect with this stuff, but you can be consistent, and you can have a lot more good days than you have bad days. So from a sleep point of view, setting yourself up for success with your sleep so that you can maximize the sleep when you are able to. Things like having a relatively set bedtime, trying to not get on technology within that hour window, even a 30-minute window before you're trying to get to bed. Sometimes things like breathing, meditation before you go to bed can help, trying to actually wind yourself down before you get into bed. Not having things like TVs in your room, not doing anything other than sleeping. And the other thing that should be getting done in the bedroom as well, in the bedroom. These are all things that can set yourself up for success. And sleeping, I think, is what pretty well the number one thing that most people may lack that they should focus on. And there's a lot more stuff coming out in science and in the media about how important sleep is and how detrimental a lack of sleep can be to us. So even though I do train, this is still a very high focus on my priority list, is getting a solid amount of sleep every night. So that would be number one. Number two would be your water intake, making sure you're properly hydrated. So I have, and if you're watching this on the video version, you'll notice I've got a massive water bottle. Very lucky to have that. It's about 1.8 liters, and I will drink around about 3 of those a day. Probably a little bit of overkill for a lot of people. If you could get in anywhere around 4 liters of water a day, you're probably sitting pretty well. I try to, from a water point of view, I try to not to kind of taper back on my water intake maybe about 3 hours before bed. Doesn't mean I don't drink water, but during the day, I will tend to sip and drink more water than what I do later on in the day. Just because I find if I drink too much water close to bedtime, I'm constantly up in the middle of the night peeing, and that affects what the number one thing that I've just spoken about focusing on is sleep and sleep quality. So that's a habit that you can instill to try and make sure that you're that way, that end of the spectrum, right? Like that you're focusing on that sleep. But hydration, I think, is another important thing. Things like electrolytes and having adequate sodium and all of that are important as well. But if you're not drinking a whole lot of water during the day, it almost doesn't matter how much of these other things you put in, you're almost fighting a losing battle as a result. Now, the third thing is obviously nutrition. Now, I don't go down the rabbit hole too much on nutrition. I tend to outsource to people that know a lot more about that subject. But here are some things that I know work for me and have worked for the people that I work with. And if we were to pick one thing that we kind of focus on with people, it's getting an adequate protein intake, especially for men. This is the third thing, like making sure you are eating enough protein over the course of the day. As a rule, I kind of look at about 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilo of lean body mass. So for a lot of people, you go on the lower end of the spectrum, which is sometimes a little bit hard to do. You can do things like track your calories and try and work out how much protein you're getting, but eating protein from good whole protein sources, generally animal proteins, try and stay away in the early stages from liquid calories if you are trying to maybe lean up or lose a bit of weight or whatever the case might be. But focusing on that protein intake for a lot of people will help them get cravings and things under control, because protein from a macronutrient point of view is more satiating than carbohydrates and fats. So we tend to feel like we're fuller for longer, which without going into full blown calorie counting mode can actually help you eat less in the long term. These are very loose recommendations. Obviously, this is all very context dependent. Some people should not be calorie counting. I appreciate that. I know that some people should not be focusing on this. There are other things that they should be focusing on, but these are just some rough rules that I know have worked for the vast majority of people that I have worked with. So those busy men with young families who want to try and reclaim their overall health, their strength, their athleticism, and try and make a positive influence on the future of their lives and those around them. These are things that have worked for that type of person, myself included, right? So this is not everyone should do it. These are some things that I know have worked. So focusing on that, and then from there, the rest of what you eat through the day should be quite nutrient dense. So plenty of vegetables, making sure you're getting an adequate micronutrient profile. So you're getting a lot of colors with your vegetables, with your fruits, and kind of just backfilling the other stuff that you eat during the day with what you enjoy to eat. Carbs aren't bad. Carbs are actually a necessity for us to function as human beings. Some people respond to them better than others. It all depends on, I think from that point of view, it does depend on your activity level and what you're doing. But one thing from that point of view, I would focus on is looking at making sure I have that adequate protein intake. So they're probably the three main. If I was not able to get to the gym for whatever reason, let's say it was financial and I wasn't able to invest in the gym, they would be three things, because you have to sleep. So focusing on the quality of sleep is very important. Water doesn't cost you anything. We can get into a conversation about water quality out of a tap and all the rest of it, but you still need to make sure you're adequately hydrated. So focusing on your water intake. And then number three, from a fueling point of view, from a nutrition point of view, for a lot of people I've worked with, focusing on getting that adequate protein intake can help a lot of those other dominoes fall from trying to dial in our nutrition and the way we fuel our bodies efficiently and effectively. So they're those three things. Now, the fourth thing and the add-on to that would be, it depends on why you can't get to the gym. Now, if you're injured, this is a different story. But let's say it's a financial thing. Let's say everything is so tight and the budget is so restricted that you can't afford to go and pay $15, $20 a week to go and join a Jets or whatever the case might be. And you certainly can't afford to go and, invest in a coach to help you with that direction. Again, another conversation for another time, but I would still be endeavoring to move every day. At a minimum, I would be endeavoring to at least go for an hour walk every day. You could turn that into a run if on odd days if you wanted to, depending on previous injury history and things like that. But I would still be endeavoring to move every day. That may also look at adding in some squats with that, adding in some push-ups. If you've got some equipment down at the park, adding that in, because I think movement is a really, really important deal. If anything, it needs to be up there with a lot of this other stuff. For me as a coach, I actually address movement first, because I think that is, if you can get consistent with that, it actually helps the rest of the dominoes fall very systematically and very easily, because of those physiological things that happen when we start prioritizing movement, from the dopamine response, but most importantly, that mental response and the way we feel about ourselves. We feel more motivated to do other things. We feel more motivated to potentially not eat as much of the food that we may be over consuming, to try and prioritize drinking more water, to go to bed a little bit earlier, because we know we're going to get up and we're going to do some form of movement in the morning. There are ways you can still move, whether it be a walk, whether it be a run, whether it be doing some form of body weight workout. And I've had people that I've worked with for a very long time that have seen great success in not only their physical health, but their mental health, just from doing simple body weight workouts at home. Now, those people don't have overall strength goals where they want to lift this and lift that. They have general health and well-being goals, but I think movement is so important. If you're not able to go to the gym, say for an injury, now that's a different conversation, because it depends on what the injury is. But I still think there needs to be some level of movement prioritized, because even though you can't get to the gym, even though you're going to be unable to afford it or unable to effectively use it, you still need to do some form of movement, because as a human organism, as a human being, movement is such an important part of our DNA that if we forget to do that or we don't do that, I have seen the rest of our body suffer to a point where it just filters into the rest of our lives. It filters into the way we feel about ourselves, and then that filters into the way we act, the way we behave, the way we interact with other people. And that can, in all reality, suck out the enjoyment of life, especially if we're injured, especially if we're hurt. Now, those three things that I would be focusing on if I couldn't get to the gym, I think you need to focus on them anyway, even if you can get to the gym. In fact, there's probably more of a reason to focus on them if you're getting to the gym, which is one of the reasons why prioritizing movement is important. But if you can't, if you don't have a home gym set up, if you don't have the financial means to do it, there are ways that you can get to that point. There are plenty of free body weight programs that, regardless of what I think about the mechanics of those programs, doing something for a lot of people is better than doing nothing. As long as you're consistent with it and you are working to better yourself over time. So, to recap, the three things I would be focusing on if I was unable to get to the gym. Number one is sleep, making sure we can get the best quality of sleep when we're able to, by setting ourselves up to have a good night's, that solid 6 to 8 hours, having a solid bedtime, trying to eliminate technology prior to bed, and then also trying to make sure that even though there's going to be nights that we can't get great sleep, especially with kids, those nights that we are able to, we can maximize that sleep we can get. So that's number one. Number two is staying well hydrated, getting you appropriate water intake. Number 3, fueling your body properly. But within that, if I was to give everybody one thing that I think that they should work on, it is making sure that we have adequate protein intake. And then the last thing is still moving. You still have to move in some way, shape, or form. Going for a walk every day, doing some form of body weight workout, going for a run, finding something that you can enjoy doing that is at a low or no cost to you, I think is a very, very important thing. And even if you can't get to the gym, it needs to be prioritized for the vast majority of people. So if you're having trouble with that, and you would like some help and some guidance, you can jump on and you can book in a call. As I said at the start of the show, I'm giving away 5 of these each month for free. So jump on, book in a time, and then I can hopefully give you some direction at no cost to you as to where I think you should point your energy and attention and where you should put the majority of your work into to try and get the best result for you and your circumstance. Because regardless of what information I give out, or any information that anyone else gives out, the information that I go through here is the stuff that has worked for me individually and for those people that I've worked with. It doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody, but you have to give it a go to actually see if it's going to work for your particular set of circumstances. So that is it for this week. Please send through any questions. Let me know your feedback. Let me know what you thought of today's episode, and I will see you all next week. Goodbye.